Namo Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Saranang Gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ Saranang Gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ Saranang Gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ Saranang Gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ Saranang Gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ Saranang Gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ Saranang Gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ Saranang Gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ Saranang Gacchāmi. So, hello everybody. Tuesday again, and it was a snowy day today. So as I was saying with Nayaka Hamudaro, I don't know if anybody will come today, but we'll see, And was joking that whoever comes today really likes to meditate because it's kind of a lot of snow and very cold. And so for the people on the internet who weren't just here, told everybody if they had questions, they could feel free to ask, and we could do a talk kind of based on those questions. So Nisreen mentioned that last meditation was easier to do when there was quite a lot of kind of guidance, and this one was trickier to do. We did kind of Brahma Viharas today, and not necessarily as much guidance there. And also kind of sitting. It was kind of difficult to sit in one place all the time.
Yeah.
Just maybe your
yeah.
It's maybe your second time meditating, right? Yeah. Okay. And Ashim brought up about anger. Wanted to hear about anger. So we'll try to maybe address those topics in our talk today. So yeah. So often there's a progression in kind of meditation, like with any other skill, So, in our school, kind of when we start off in school, we go to a kind of elementary school. And when we go to elementary school, we're there, the teacher knows what we're doing at all times. And every single portion of our day is structured. I kind of remember being a little elementary school student in class. And, you kind of go there and be like, okay, now it's time to play with glue. Now you draw this and color this in, Okay, now these next half hour you're going to be doing this. Okay, now is playtime. Now is recess time. And at every single step that you're in school, there's somebody both observing you and telling you what you should be doing. Except at lunchtime, maybe where you kind of go out and play with your friends, and then that's kind of totally unstructured. And then you get in from elementary school, as the grades go up more, you get kind of progressively less supervision. And then I still remember high school, at least this is the way they do it in Canada, was a big change, because then you actually don't even have a specific teacher assigned to you. You're kind of jumping between all these classes, and people have different classes, and that keeps increasing as you go through the grades in high school until you're choosing a lot of your classes. In the later grades, they're just totally up to you. And the teachers still check if you're there, but it's kind of, not really like it was. You can actually leave, if you want during the day. The teacher, if you keep doing it, they might call you out. And that's it. And then when you get to undergrad in university, you actually don't even have to go to class. You have a textbook, and you're to learn the textbook, and you have kind of like a midterm often and a final exam. And sometimes you have like just 3 or 4 projects for the whole class, for the whole term. And the teacher just says, here's your textbook, here's your project, finish it by this time and it's worth 50% of your mark. Remember, I was kind of blown away by that at first. Like, what do you mean? Okay, we got 4 weeks before the project's due, woohoo, And then you realize that if you don't start doing your project, right away, then you're in big trouble, And then if you go on to kind of a master's, it's even less. You just kind of have this kind of a thesis, and the same with a PhD. You have a thesis advisor, and you have to choose a really good thesis, and you have like 3 or 4 years or 2 years or whatever to research your thesis, write it, and then it all comes down your 3 or 4 years to whether or not you can defend it well, and your papers get published. And that's it. 3 or 4 years, just up to you, And so meditation is a skill like that. It's a progression in a similar way. So we start off, and it's good to have like a lot of instructions. With any skill, we first start with, it's kind of a comfortable thing. Okay, do step A, do step B, step C, step D. Know exactly what to do in each of these various steps and how to do it. And this gives people kind of a lot of comfort. Because it feels like we know what we're supposed to do. We know where we're supposed to be going. Sometimes they even have these kind of like charts. Okay, once you do step B, this is step C, and it's got to go like this, And it's kind of a very comforting thing, because then you can be like, okay, here I am at step B, I've got to go to step C. These are the things I've got to accomplish to get there, And so it's a kind of very nice thing. So actually nowadays in the West, there's these kind of meditation courses that people can go to. They're actually, they're good things, they're nice things. And they're kind of very technique focused. So you go there and it's like, just keep doing the technique. There's like a manual. You follow the steps in the manual. It tells you exactly where you are at the various steps in that manual and exactly how to go to the next step. And that's the way that everybody does it with these kind of techniques. They're kind of very popular. And you can go for like 10 days and there's a teacher who'll ask you like, where are you in this technique? And kind of check in with you in that. And these are kind of very, very popular. And it also is very popular in the West, possibly because there's this kind of like scientific methodology where we take a general principle and reduce it to very specific steps. That's the way a lot of institutions work in the West. So you have to follow those steps in these various institutions, or you could lose your license. But meditation, the interesting thing about it is that to become really skilled at it, although it starts off with these things, okay, try these things out, what might have also noticed was that there was instructions for the people who've been here, like if you've been here a lot of different times, you've tried a lot of different meditation techniques, try to see which one works for you. Try to find one that you have a kind of affinity with, and then learn to play with it, learn to manipulate it, So in other words, there's this point where having these kind of techniques are good, but there's also a point where they get in the way. Not to say the whole thing gets in the way, but there's a point where they can hold you back. So I remember I had a friend of mine, he was really into going to these kind of retreats where you do this one technique. It was very specific. You had to do the technique this way. And certain times if they found out you weren't doing it, you're in big trouble. And he kept doing this technique, going on retreats. And what he said was, I found that there was a point where I just kind of stagnated. My meditation wasn't progressing at all. I was just kind of doing this technique, and I wasn't able to advance, Kind of stagnated. It felt like it wasn't able to go any further, And so that's because one of the reasons for this is because it's kind of like when we meditate, it's not just about doing a technique. It's kind of like if we were chopping down a tree sometimes. We're trying to eliminate certain defilements. And if you hack at a tree, like just keep hacking in one place, at first, the first few hacks, hack at it for 5 minutes and all these huge chips of wood are flying. Whoa, I'm making big progress. But the thing that tends to happen is this kind of wedge, the area where you're able to hack, it goes like this, like a triangle, and it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. So then each hack you do takes off less and less and less. And if you keep hacking the same spot, your axe gets stuck. Your saw gets stuck in that spot, It doesn't go any further. And so to cut down a tree well, sometimes you have to chop that spot, and if it's not going any further, you go around to the side, you observe what's going on with the tree, and you hack at this other spot. You start a new wedge in a totally new place. And it's different for each tree. Each tree you cut down isn't going to be the same. You can't just follow a totally set, pat set of steps every single time. So this is why in meditation it's the same thing. We have these kind of defilements in our mind, these kind of things that bring us down. And when we first start to sit and meditate, even just the act of learning to focus on one thing without our mind rushing here, rushing there, rushing up, rushing down, left, right, just that is like hacking in a new spot. Even just doing that seems to take away a lot of our defilements. But then if we keep sticking with this kind of same technique over and over again, it's like hitting the same spot again and again. Eventually the ones that technique was good at countering, The defilements it was good at subduing, they're subdued as long as we keep doing it. But new ones start to grow up around it. Kind of to change metaphors, it's like if we had this kind of garden, and the garden seemed all right, and we started clearing weeds in one spot. And we just kept clearing the weeds in that one spot. Eventually what happens is the weeds in the rest of the garden start to grow really tall. They can even start to invade that spot. Sometimes the roots go underground and come up in that spot. So this is why meditation, although it can seem it's very good at the beginning to have these very specific instructions, like being, starting anything. But then you notice for the people who've been here a lot, it's like, okay, well, see if you can find a technique, something that kind of hits the spot for you, and then learn to play with it. Learn to see how to manipulate it so that that particular way of meditating seems to make your mind calm, And then if it changes, it's good to have other things in the bag too, so you can switch. It's kind of like hacking in one spot and going around the side of the tree to chop at another portion, So in this way, we become people who aren't tied down by a technique, although we learn it for our basis, We become people who have a variety of kind of techniques, who have like a skilled woodsman who wants to cut down a tree, learns to kind of evaluate the tree, learns to chop in one place, and then intuitively they learn, okay, this isn't really going anywhere. My axe is getting stuck more. Time to move around to another side and to chop there. And this is what meditation is like. If you think about how complicated it is to cut down a tree, it's a piece of wood and it's kind of standing up straight. Really that's something you should be able to come up with a technique A, B, C, D for. If you're going to come up with it, it's just about anything. It should be how to cut down a tree. But actually, there's a lot that goes into cutting down trees. If anybody's tried to cut down a tree before, a lot of things can go wrong even. That tree can fall and crush you. Sometimes you're hacking a tree and it's like this. And if you don't take into account the way it's leaning, it can fall like the opposite direction from the one you were hacking it. That's just a tree, So there's nothing more complicated than the mind. That's the most complicated, difficult thing to tame in the world. Actually, even the Buddha couldn't think up, but there was no simile for how quickly the mind changes. The Buddha was the master of similes. He had a simile for everything. He was able to compare things and accurately, compare them well in a way that was accurate. But, because he was such a skilled teacher, even he said, the mind changes quickly, monks, so quickly that it's difficult to find an adequate metaphor for how quickly it changes. That was the Buddha, So even the Buddha couldn't compare, like even faster than the twinkling of an eye, Like faster than anything we can think of, the mind can change. And so the only thing that can counter it are wholesome mental qualities, wholesome mental skills that we develop. So this is why we start with a technique, but then actually as we advance in our meditation practice, it gets more like going into a master's, going into a PhD. We have a thesis. We know what defilement we're trying to counter. And sometimes we have a thesis advisor, like a teacher who's observing us, and we talk to them, and we're like, okay, I'm working with this, and then they say, okay, try this or try that, and we have our thesis. We go after it, and we try to write that thesis ourselves. And they're usually just there to kind of observe and correct us. Sometimes they're just there. They don't even really say anything to us, Sometimes don't even ask us, how our meditation is going, And all this is to build our skill level up to the point where we can become, kind of independent, like a person who's going for their PhD. In other words, they have this wide body of skills they gained from elementary school. They have a knowledge they gained from undergrad. And now they have something they're trying to achieve themselves. They're trying to break through to something on their own. And it's up to them to do it. So in this way, meditation has this progression. We start with these techniques, and glad you mentioned that actually, because now if I see many new people come in, I can just keep doing the breath one for a bit, and kind of till they feel settled. But also, when people come a lot, then this is where we don't just stay necessarily in a place that's always comfortable, We kind of learn to go a little bit beyond our boundaries every time, And this is where it requires us to, We learn to go a little bit beyond our boundaries, trying to stretch our skills. And this is where it requires us to kind of start to judge our mind. What's the best topic for me? What counters my defilements? How do I adjust it? You know? So that's one of the things about the topic. And then the same thing with kind of our physical pain in our bodies. You know? It's kind of learning to sit. That's one of the things that comes up most often, is this kind of feeling of physical pain. You know? And I remember when I first started meditating, actually, I was in like terrible pain. Every time I meditated, it was just this, the whole time I wasn't even focusing on my topic. It was just kind of like a teeth gritting, experience to, make it through the meditation session and, escape from the physical pain. Kind of every time, it was like that for like years, or maybe not years that I wasn't able to focus, but, being in intense physical pain for like a long period of time. I mean, more than a year, like years, that it felt very painful every time I meditated. Not, it got better and better. You gain flexibility. But basically what it was I wasn't used to sitting on the floor is one thing. And the second thing was that I wasn't used to physical pain. I actually thought I was this like really tough guy, because I'd taken martial arts and, done Taekwondo, and I was really into rap music. Those people kind of very tough, But I remember going on my first retreat, and there was all these old ladies, they were in their 60s. And I was sitting there in this terrible pain, just, in intense pain. And I kept having to, shift around. And sometimes the monk who was leading the retreat, it was a Zen retreat, and he'd be like, focus on your object, He'd just shout these things out. And he was kind of shouting them at me, because I was the one who was shifting the most. And I'd look over at these ladies who were 65, and they were like, just kind of, very peacefully, sitting. And I remember being at these retreats, and I was like, wow, these ladies are really tough, They're a lot tougher than me. I'm kind of a wimp here, I can't kind of take this physical pain. They can, But actually, a lot of this tends to be the way that we train our mind during the course of the day, We train our mind during the course of the day. It's always rushing after things that we want to consume, want to eat, want to watch, want to talk about, and we never restrain it. Then when physical pain comes up, the first thing that happens is it rushes towards that pain. When the mind rushes towards that pain and grabs onto it, worry starts to come up about that pain. And then the body gets tense around the pain, which makes the pain worse. So it starts this kind of vicious cycle where we're like, oh, there's pain, I got to endure it. It's too hard. And then our body tenses around the pain gets worse. We start to worry more about the pain. Then sometimes we can even become very critical about meditation. Like, meditation is all about pain, I can't take the pain. And we get up and leave the meditation or whatever, stop meditating, whatever it is. But actually all this is just an obstacle that's been, it is a physical thing. But there's a large portion to pain that's actually mental suffering. There's a large portion to physical pain that's mental. And so that's something we learn a lot about when we come to meditate, Because physical pain is something that is going to be inevitable, that we have to face in our life. So this is actually a time when we develop the skill to be like, okay, this pain is there, but I'll focus on meditation anyway. And as we do this more and more, two things happen. One is that our body starts to become more flexible, provided that we kind of learn, we try to endure it a little bit more. We try to do the things that make our body more flexible every time, might try to sit for a little longer. And the second thing that happens is that our mind becomes more equanimous to physical pain. In other words, there's this kind of detachment to it. The pain is there, but it doesn't overwhelm us anymore. It's like somebody who, you stand really close to the shore, and there's lots of big waves. You stand really close, the wave comes in and it kind of swamps you, It kind of pulls you out sometimes into the sea, You kind of flounder back up and another wave comes and, I don't know if everybody's ever been swimming in the ocean or a sea where you just keep get these kind of waves coming at you. And if we have a mind that's used, if we train our mind to rush out and it comes too close to the pain, then that's what happens. The pain comes over and swamps us and pulls us out into this kind of realm of pain. But the more that we learn to train our mind, it's more like standing on the kind of shore. And the waves come in, and we know they're there, but we're just watching them, you know. They're just there. We can still do our thing on the beach. The waves are there, you know. Sometimes you have to pay attention to them. If a big tidal wave is coming or the tide is coming in and you're going to get, you know, drowned, then okay, go up to higher ground. In other words, if you're going to injure yourself, change positions, you know. But then there's also this aspect of pain where it's just mental. It's our mental attention to the pain that's amplifying it, you know. So actually, learning to meditate, our capacity to endure physical pain can increase quite a lot, you know. Not just physical pain, also like hot and cold, you know, these things they can start to affect us less, you know? And so this right there is a huge reduction in suffering, you know, because a lot of the time, you know, some people, like, suffering can come a lot worrying about the physical pain that will come with this or that. But we learn to confront it, we learn to take care of it, we learn to understand it in meditation, then this kind of aspect of physical pain goes down. We don't suffer from it as much. So that's two things that can happen when we just learn to focus on our meditation object, leave the physical pain, or we learn to approach the physical pain in appropriate ways. Sometimes give some instruction on that. And then as far as kind of anger goes, kind of there was this one monk I met, and he was what they call a kind of dosa type. Dosa means a hatred, you know, kind of. And he said to one of these kind of very famous teachers in Thailand, he said, you know, I'm kind of a dosa type. You know, one of his teachers actually, I think he could see what this monk was thinking, and he said, you know, Venerable Tan, they call them Tan in Thailand. He said, Tan X, you know, you've got a lot of hatred. You know, he said, so well, don't worry. You know, hatred is easy to counter. You just spread metta. And then later, this monk said, yeah, and then I kept going around and doing these things. And he said that same teacher came back to me again. He said, you know, Tan X, if you don't stop with your anger, you're not going to have any friends. In other words, this kind of hatred is a kind of delusion. Yeah? There's things that come with anger. Anger often has this aspect where when a person gets angry frequently, what tends to happen is when you get really angry at somebody the first time, they give you what you want. You know? So in other words, you know, we learn that when we get angry, we get what we want. So it becomes this kind of aspect, this idea, especially in the West, that anger is associated with power. And kind of, you know, like just letting things be, letting people get angry at you and not responding, that's associated with weakness, at least in the West, often. You know? It's kind of this idea that if we get angry, we get what we want. So, you know, you see people, when they want a refund, they go to the store and they flip out on the customer service person, like, give me my refund, this product was terrible. They start causing a scene in the store, and eventually the manager comes and, okay, yeah, well, you know, we'll give you this refund. So we have this kind of idea in our heads that anger gets us what we want. This can be a kind of very big stumbling block in the West, especially. This kind of idea that anger is equivalent to power, and lack of anger is equivalent to weakness, to getting stomped on, to people doing whatever they want to you, and to not getting what we want. You know? So one of the ways to counter that is to actually observe the way that anger works. You know? Because what tends to happen is anger is another one of these things that we talk about in meditation often, where it graphs, like we get a short-term gain and then much worse results in the long term. And just to give a kind of metaphor, there was this happens in the animal world as well as the human world. There was this kind of a cat at this at this one monastery that I visited. And this cat was this female cat. She was kind of this boss cat. And all the other cats, I think when a cat, like the food came, like she would eat the large portion of the food. And these other cats, you know, sometimes maybe not get enough food. She was very cruel to these other cats. She was like a big cat. Maybe these other cats not as large. You know, she'd kind of like swat at them. And, you know, she kind of had this area. And I guess maybe the other cats couldn't go there. And being really angry like this angry female cat, could have been, you know, not, in this case it was a female cat, could have been a male cat, but the other cats did what she wanted. You know, they're kind of afraid of her, you know. But then what ended up happening to this cat was, as this cat got older, there were other cats who started getting stronger. And just like humans, like animals remember things and they kind of hold grudges. You know? And so when this cat started getting weak, these cats that she'd been bullying turned on her. And she didn't have a good time after that. Human guarding you, animals are very cruel. Like you can die from this kind of this kind of cruelty. And actually, when we observe the way that anger works in our own life and other people's lives, this is what tends to happen. You know? Especially the people who are near to us, we dominate them through anger, and at first it works. You know? But eventually the people who we're angry at, who we dominate, what tends to happen is the day comes when they get less and less frightened of our anger. What actually happens is that they tend to care less and less if we get offended. You know? So this is where we see this aspect where harsh speech leads to more harsh speech, because the people who get really angry, eventually the people who they dominated, when the time comes they have a little bit of weakness, all these people turn on them and start attacking them. Like sometimes very ruthlessly and cruelly, you know, even to the extent that they don't have to. And they have this kind of memory in their head of all these things this person has said or done to them, you know. And so this tends to be the way that it works. You know? So when we see this kind of way that anger graphs, it doesn't just happen that way for animals or our own life. You can observe the way that it works for dictators, say. You know, this is the way that happens with dictators. Everybody's really scared of them for a while, and then eventually people stop getting as scared of their threats, and there's a rebellion, and the dictator tends to get murdered in a really terrible way, you know, quite often. That happens a lot, you know. Just observe the lives of many dictators. This is the way that a lot of them tend to go. You know? And so when we see this kind of pattern, we start to realize, okay, wait a minute, anger isn't power. You know? This is something that will get me what I want in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to bring me a lot of trouble. You know? So this is why the Buddha says that anger has this sweet root or sweet tip. Like a sweet tip, like when you grab it, it feels really sweet. Yeah, I'm angry, I'm powerful. But then when it goes, you have this bitter root. In other words, the end result of anger is really terrible. You know? So reflecting in this way, we can learn to overcome anger, learn to understand it, and then have more tools to avoid it. It's kind of often this delusion that propels us to keep getting angry, keep dominating people. So I think that's, we're kind of out of time for today, but those are some thoughts on meditation topics, techniques, on sitting through pain, and on dealing with anger. So we used to call that, when I was young, we used to call that a freestyle, you know, so this was a kind of freestyle Dhamma talk. So I think I'll leave that for reflection today, and hope everybody has a great week.